What is up, everybody? Welcome back to this week's edition of the Touchline Talk Show. Good to be back after a week of travel. Have a really good story coming on the Philadelphia Union Academy. Talked to Brandon Craig, talked to Paxton Aronson, some other Academy players. Still working on one more interview, so that story will be coming. That's why we did not have a show last week. Be sure to subscribe on Substack, touchlinetalk.substack.com, to see that story. But plenty to get to this evening. Of course, we're going to fully break down the semifinals of Euro 2022, and then going to dive into our 2-week European season preview series, looking at the biggest storylines in the top 5 leagues, those 5 major leagues. We're going to do Bundesliga and La Liga this week, the other 3 next week, but it's hard to believe it already is that time again to set the scene as these leagues sort of ramp up and begin play here very, very soon. Before we get to that, though, England goes from barely surviving against Spain, lucky to still be in the tournament, to a breathtaking 4-0 win over Sweden to advance to the Euro final. Have the opportunity to take that extra step the men's team was not able to, and actually win this thing, bring it home, at home. But at the very beginning of this game, it looked like there might be some sort of history repeating itself in terms of what we saw against Spain. In a different form, but the idea of England not being able to get a hold of the game and just not having answers. I mean, Sweden came out pressing intensely. It was incredibly well executed. They took those turnovers. They attacked the space behind Lucy Bronze, got in behind her twice in the first 10 minutes. That space that is always going to be there against England because of the way they play. You had Mary Earps make that huge save right after the kickoff. She made another big one late. Sweden wasted chances. This could have been 2-0 before England even got into the game. But you fail to execute. You put yourself in a bad situation, and that's exactly what happened to Sweden. And then, all of a sudden, here comes England. Beth Mead gets the first goal, set up by Lucy Bronze, who finally got involved going forward. It's been a rough tournament for her. She was so good at that 2019 World Cup. And just the pressing, trying to build up, build the play through her, it just hasn't worked. And so England finally sort of solved this by getting a little more central with their build-up and letting Lucy Bronze do what she does best, which is join that attack in the final third, support the attack, create part of that attack in the final third. And this was the game where finally it came together for her. And what she contributed offensively more than outweighed the price you paid defensively for having her so high up the field. It's not a question of her defensive ability. It's a question of positionally what you're giving up by holding her so high and having her so involved offensively. So she sets up the first one, then comes right out of halftime, gets the header for the second, and all of a sudden England's starting to run away with this thing. Of course, you also have the Alicia Russo back heel, just filthy. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. To get that much power on the ball, running away like that, absolutely incredible. She's been terrific off the bench. No, I'm not changing the starting lineup for the final. Serena Vigman's got this set perfectly. It's the same idea that I like to talk about in basketball. You don't necessarily need your best, and it's a little bit different because obviously you can substitute whenever you want in basketball, you can't in soccer, but you don't necessarily need your best 11 players on the field at the beginning of the game. You need to organize this in the way that makes the most sense. It's not like you're having trouble producing offensively. So you leave Russo, she gives you something different, she gives you energy, obviously a lethal finisher in terrific form right now. So it gives you that opportunity to make that change. But you don't need to do something differently from the beginning because it's working with Ellen White. It's working with that starting 11. Same thing with Ella Toon. You go down this bench. They have difference makers. You don't need to mess with the rhythm of that starting 11, though, just because they're playing well. You bring them in the 60th minute and you give them enough time to influence the game. You don't wait until minute 75. That's one of my issues sometimes with coaches. And Vigman's been good about that. They get in the game, and they get in the game fairly early into the second half, which allows them to shine the way that bench as a whole, but Russo in particular, are. The other really important thing here, Fran Kirby, much, much, much more involved in this game. If you want to figure out how England is playing, the question you ask yourself is, how involved is Fran Kirby? What kind of impact is she making on the game? Yes, they can do it without her, but when that offense, that attack is flowing, when it is at its best, it is because she is the one pulling the strings. Lauren Hemp hasn't had a particularly memorable tournament. You're looking at her heading in as kind of a potential breakout candidate in the sense that she announces herself as one of the premier players in this tournament, and that hasn't really happened. Of course, Beth Mead has been fantastic. But when it really works and it flows, that's because Fran Kirby's involved. And when it wasn't working against Spain, and even going back to the Austria game, you weren't hearing Fran Kirby's name a lot. That is how you know how well England is playing. What is Fran Kirby doing? How much of an impact is she making? How much is her name getting called? And from a Sweden perspective, and sort of as an opponent of England, this is what happens when you try to play with this team and you don't take your chances and you lose your ability to press after 20, 30 minutes. And that's where I'm really fascinated. We'll get to this more in the weekend look ahead, talking about the final. But to see how Germany approaches this. Because what has become abundantly clear is there are two ways to get at this England team. Press them, which is what Sweden was able to do at the beginning. Lucy Bronze has had trouble in the build-up, as I mentioned before. It hasn't always been smooth. They're prone to turning the ball over. They struggle to sort of get a hold if you continue to press them, which is, again, a lot to ask physically to do that for 90 minutes. But that is one way to get at them. And the other way is what Spain did, which is keep the ball away from them. Don't let them build a rhythm. Don't let that offense and those, that front six start clicking and start building passes together and get into a rhythm. If you can make life difficult for them, attacking the fullbacks, and Rachel Daly playing out of position at left back in particular, there are vulnerabilities there defensively on both sides. Lucy Bronze positioning, Rachel Daly not playing in her natural position. She got absolutely exposed against Spain. There are ways to get at this England team. But you've got to also score and take your chances, which seems really simple, but that is a big part of this because it's so hard to keep them off the scoreboard. You're probably not going to have quite as many chances, but Sweden easily could have had at least a 2-2 in there for a while with all the chances they didn't take. England only needed a couple. They got a couple, and all of a sudden, instead of being 2-0 Sweden, it's 2-0 England. But I am not convinced anybody can sit there and just play defense for 90 minutes against this team. Austria, one of the most defensively sound teams in this tournament, still got a goal. It was a bad performance from England, and they still got that goal. And they're good enough defensively, right? They're not conceding many goals. You got Millie Bright in there to clean up everything coming into the box. So you have to find a way to really take the initiative, which is what I find so fascinating about this and the decisions Germany has to make in terms of how to approach this. If you play a game on England's terms, I don't see a way to beat them. of any of these European teams. The U.S. might be able to, but that's for the World Cup next summer. And also, so I mentioned Germany, want to talk about this a little bit as well. Germany get by France. There was not a lot to write home about at the beginning of this game. It was two teams kind of bunkered in, very much trying not to make mistakes, not to give anything cheap away. Two well-organized teams defensively. And then the floodgates kind of opened. France doesn't get pressure on the ball, and Alex Popp scores a goal that just gets better every time you watch it. And both of her goals were just pure poacher finishes. The first one, the cross comes in, she cuts across and stabs it with her left foot, somehow manages to keep it under control and get enough power on it to do what needs to be done, but also not flying it over the net, and also not sort of whiffing on the contact, because at that angle, in that position, you need to hit the ball cleanly and connect really well with it. It was a phenomenal finish, kind of out of nothing. And then right after that, Cadetto Diani fires a rocket, again out of nothing, that bounces off the post, off Marilla From's, and into the net. And so you go into halftime. It looked like it was going to be 0-0, and all of a sudden it's 1-1. And then it's Pop again to get the game winner. The header, just again, the run to give herself the space to get to the ball, cutting in front. She's so difficult to mark, and it's beautiful to watch. It's a striker in the form of her life. She has been brilliant in this tournament. Her and Beth Mead now have a chance to play each other to see who's going to be the leading scorer in this tournament. It wasn't the best performance in the world by Germany, and it was really about Pop because they didn't create all that much. And France had opportunities in the second half once Pop put Germany ahead for a second time, and it was 2-1. There are ways to get at this Germany team, as good as they have been defensively. And so this sets up, A, what the final should be, and B, just a fascinating tactical debate in my mind, and just how do you approach this? How are these teams going to handle this? Because they have been the best two teams in the tournament. Both have shown vulnerabilities, and you've seen how to get at them, where their weaknesses are, particularly on the England side, as I laid out. And so, does Germany actually have enough to hang with England? This is the question since the tournament started. And especially after England did what they did to Norway. This is the question everybody wanted answered. We're going to get an answer. The best two teams are in the final. That doesn't often happen. Let's take a moment to actually appreciate that. We're going to get the game this tournament deserves. Should be phenomenal. So there is England, Germany for Euro 2022. We'll do more looking ahead to this game in the weekend look ahead. We're going to take our first break here. When we come back, Bundesliga, La Liga, seasons are about to get underway here in a matter of days. What are the biggest storylines? Trying to sort of encapsulate what to be watching for, what I'm most interested in as we get ready to start this new European season. You're watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to the Touchline Talk Show. As I said, we're going to go through Bundesliga, La Liga previews this week. Then we'll save the other three major leagues, Premier League, Serie A, Ligue 1, for next week's show as we get ready for all of these leagues to start their new seasons. So what we're going to do here for all of these leagues, we're going to first recap some of the biggest developments of the summer, players leaving, players coming into the league, sort of the marquee signings you need to know about, and then talk about the three biggest storylines I'm looking at, the things I'm most interested in heading into the season. So for the Bundesliga, obviously the summer has been dominated by the two teams that dominate this league in Borussia Dortmund and Bayern Munich. Bayern Munich, plenty of moving in and out here. Matthias de Ligt, the most recent signing, of course, already got Sadio Mane, Ryan Gravenberch, Nusam Rizwari in to help fortify this team. And then on the departing side, Robert Lewandowski, Nicolas Sua, Corentin Tolisso are the bigger names that left. Tolisso not playing that big of a role recently. Sewell kind of in and out. Lewandowski is obviously the one key player, but the other two guys have been there, have been staples of that club, so I wanted to mention them as well. And you look at this, and this is very much kind of like for like replacements / filling needs. And I talked about this before, but you need an upgrade at right back. If there's one weakness in the team, that's where it is. Nusam Rizwawi, check. You add Gravenberch to Jamal Musiala, you've got two of the most promising young midfielders in the world. You can always use an upgrade at center back, so you get Matthias de Ligt, who fits at Bayern much better than he did at Juventus. And Sadio Mane proved last season at the second half, once Luis Diaz came in, he's more than capable of playing as a number 9. You can play him out wide, you can play him in the center. So my point when they signed him was, this is both cover for Robert Lewandowski potentially leaving, or it's just an upgrade at the wing position. Lewandowski, of course, is gone. You would think Mane is going to play through the middle. So the question becomes, what is the gap between these two players? Can Mane carry the load the way Lewandowski has? But from a roster standpoint and a starting lineup standpoint, they have filled the departures, filled the area of need, and upgraded at multiple other positions with guys like de Ligt and Rizwari. So, very good summer for Bayern. And the same can be said for Borussia Dortmund, who might have my favorite summer of any team in the world. Also mentioned this a little bit because they got their business done early for the most part. Sebastian Haller coming in to replace Erling Haaland, who of course went to Manchester City. It sounds just horrible news. Haller found out a few weeks ago, maybe not even 2, maybe it was more like a week ago, but recently diagnosed with a tumor, still going through testing, developing a treatment plan. But it does sound possible he's back in a matter of months, which is incredibly promising news. Wish him all the best, of course. So that will be a little bit delayed, but there are other players who can handle that striker position in the interim. And then the other players are really where I want to focus. Karim Adeyemi, and then your two center backs. Sula, who just left Bayern Munich, and Nico Schlotterbeck, who was as good as any center back in the Bundesliga last season. Your other notable departures outside of Erling Haaland, Roman Bürki, longtime goalkeeper, Axel Witsel, Marcel Schmelzer. Not guys playing huge roles at this point, but again, sort of those club legends, guys who have been at Dortmund for a very, very long time. I will save some of my Dortmund thoughts for one of our storylines here, but these two teams, incredibly busy. Players in, players out, big names, both of them, both arrivals and departures. It's going to be a little bit different looking Bundesliga next season, which is exciting from a neutral perspective, just to see how all of these changes end up playing out, both from a Germany perspective and from a Champions League sort of European hierarchy perspective. A couple other notable moves in the league I wanted to mention. Bayern Leverkusen has signed 20-year-old Adam Hlozek from Sparta Prague in the Czech Republic. He had 2 really, really good seasons for Sparta Prague and very promising player for a team that had a very good season. So that's a name to keep your eye on if you're looking for sort of a newcomer, instant impact kind of guy. Leipzig's big signing, Xaver Schlager, comes from Wolfsburg, but he also played at Red Bull Salzburg, so he's familiar with the Red Bull system, how that all works. And for Leipzig, your 2 notable departures, Tyler Adams, of course, at Leeds, and Nordi Mukiele. This team is undergoing some roster turnover the past season and a half or so. So those are your recent moves there. The other one I wanted to mention, just a departure, but Union Berlin, who had a phenomenal season last year, have sold Taiwo Awonini to Nottingham Forest as one of Forest's marquee signings as they enter the Premier League. He had 15 league goals last season in the Bundesliga. So that is something Union Berlin is going to have to replace. There are new pieces coming in. We'll see if they can make up for that departure, but that is the other notable departure in the Bundesliga. Okay, on to our storylines. My first one is simply, are we going to have a title race? This is one of my storylines almost every season in the Bundesliga. A, because it's always a question that deserves discussion, and B, this year in particular could be fascinating. All in all, Bayern had a phenomenal summer. Really big fan of what they've done. We just don't know how much losing Robert Lewandowski is going to hurt. He is not somebody, as good as Sadio Mane is, you can just say, we'll plug somebody else in there. At points in the last 3-4 years, this guy has been the best player in the world. He scores 30-plus goals every season. He is the focal point of everything they do in attack. It is not clear somebody else can carry that load the way he did. And it is not clear Sadio Mane is capable of doing that because he's never been in this kind of position. There is absolutely a world in which Bayern take a step back without Robert Lewandowski, which is, the coldest take out there. And by take a step back, I mean more than just they're not quite as good, as in they might be vulnerable. I would be tempted to pick Dortmund to win if they would have held on to Haaland, but they both lost their strikers, so to a certain extent, and brought in new ones that fit well with what they're trying to do and make a lot of sense. So to a certain extent, that's just kind of a wash. But the other part of this for me, and why I love what Dortmund have done so much, I will keep going back to the same things in this conversation about the top of the Bundesliga and the battle between these two teams. For Dortmund to win this league and to really give Bayern a contest from match day 1 to match day 34, 2 things have to change. A, they got to start winning some of these head-to-head matchups. They're dropping 4 to 6 points every season, it seems like, head-to-head. When you're trying to catch Bayern, you need to be flipping that and getting, at the very least, a 3-point edge or something. You win at home, draw on the road. Second, they got to fix the defense, which is where I am optimistic this race could be really, really, really interesting. Niklas Süle is incredibly experienced. He won the league plenty of times with Bayern, and Nico Schlotterbeck was fantastic last season. This is the best group of center backs Dortmund has had since at least the first Matt Hummels era, which, Jurgen Klopp was there, and they were very much giving Bayern a run for their money. in a way they really haven't since. So even if Haller is gone for an extended period of time, they can score goals. That has never been the problem. The problem is, can they defend on a level comparable to Bayern Munich? Because they haven't been close. And it's those 5, 6, 8 points that end up separating those teams at the end of the season, even when Dortmund have a good year and are competitive. That could actually change. This is the first time I see something from a roster construction standpoint that I look at and say, I can see a world in which Dortmund are good enough defensively to really, really challenge Bayern and give us what we haven't had in this league, which is a genuine back and forth, I don't know who's going to win title race. It's been a lot of, well, Dortmund's hanging around, maybe, if they can win their Klassiker, and of course that doesn't happen, and then they're just sort of hanging. I'm optimistic this season could be different. I also am not betting against Bayern Munich until they give me reason to do so, and even in a down year last season where they were nowhere near the best team in the world, they still gave you no reason to actually bet against them in Germany. And now Erling Haaland is gone. So, I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just telling you there are reasons why this actually could get really interesting and is worth paying attention to. Storyline number 2. And I'm going to use some version of this for a lot of the leagues just because it's a fascinating subplot to the title race, which is the battle for the top 4 in the Champions League spots. But particularly for Germany, I wanted to highlight this because 6th place Freiburg, 3 points back from Leipzig, who finished 4th. Union Berlin, of course, were in 5th. I believe I mentioned that before. Leipzig had a bad year, and it started with the Jesse Marsch thing not working. They picked it up some, but they are not the same force they were 2-3 years ago. And so you've got, a Freiburg team, a Union Berlin team, both coming off really good seasons. And then also you have this very fascinating, you're expecting Bayer Leverkusen to be there as well. And then you have this fascinating question of how does Eintracht Frankfurt handle playing in the Champions League, and can they manage the Champions League part of this with an improved domestic season? Because they weren't good last year, but they found a way to win the Europa League. So all of a sudden they're in the Champions League. It's sort of that Villarreal thing where, they qualified for it. We'll get to them in a minute here, but they qualified for Europa Conference League while also making the Champions League semifinals. It is really difficult for these smaller clubs to balance both. Now, Frankfurt was playing in European competition and played as many European games as they could because they got the final Europa League. But also they paid a price for it domestically with where they finished. On paper, they could absolutely contend for a top 4 spot. Are they actually able to, though, with also having this Champions League responsibility? Or, because you're not going to necessarily fancy them to get out of the group stage, does it end up helping them and allow them to have a better season in the Bundesliga than last year because they're not playing as many games that they go out in the group stage? It's a very interesting sort of subplot to all of this I wanted to highlight. And number 3 is very simply, how do these teams that just got promoted fare? Because they are not your prototypical teams that just got promoted. We're talking about Schalke and Werder Bremen. Werder Bremen had 6 top 3 finishes in a 7-year span, from 2003, 2004 to 2009, 2010 season. Schalke have consistently been in Europe over the past decade or so and finished 2nd as recently as 2017-18. And they both got relegated. And now they're both promoted. Of course, these squads are nowhere near as good as the ones when they were playing in Europe consistently. But this is I mean, the Bundesliga version of Leeds United getting promoted. These are clubs with big time histories, massive amounts of success. They are big names in German soccer. And the Schalke part of this and just the disaster that led to them getting relegated is fascinating. Simply, how do they rebound? But you got a lot of teams at the bottom of the Bundesliga who have capitalized on the fact that these two teams, who were just locks to be there year in and year out, all of a sudden really struggled. And so you had these open Bundesliga spots because they got relegated and they were in very, very dark places as a club. Now they're back. What does this look like? Are they able to, get their grip on the Bundesliga, avoid getting relegated, and then start flexing some financial muscle and slowly build back to where they were? Because this is, again, going back to the Leeds thing. It's the same idea of these teams expect to be competing for Europe. But to get from a promoted team, and these teams are not that Leeds United team that came up. It's so difficult to get from that point to where you're competing for Europe. Just look at how Leeds followed up their very impressive debut season, return to the Premier League. Nearly got themselves relegated. So that is another fascinating storyline in all of this to me is, what do these teams look like? Are they any good? Do they go straight back down? Or are we looking at this going, okay, I see what they're doing. They're getting the results they need. Can they then build on this and start that trajectory back to getting to be where they should, which is definitely top half of the league and right there knocking on the door of European competition and finishing in the top 4 on a fairly consistent basis. They got a long way to go, but it is not, you don't have teams getting promoted like this in every league, so I wanted to highlight that. And now, on to La Liga. Same idea here. We're going to just sort of go through, recap the summer, and then look at our big storylines and the things I'm most curious about heading into this season. Unsurprisingly, your summer dominated by Real Madrid and Barcelona. Real Madrid get Antonio Rudiger from Chelsea and sign Aurelien Tchouameni. Very, very promising midfielder. Everybody in the world was going after him. He chose Real Madrid. So now you've got incredible young talent in that midfield. Luka Jovic, Isco, Marcelo, Gareth Bale are your big names to leave. None of them playing important roles in that run to the Champions League and, returning to the summit of La Liga. But Marcelo still, captain. Gareth Bale has won countless trophies. Isco's been there for all of that as well. Luka Jovic was supposed to be a big part of this team moving forward, and it just never really happened. So again, this turnover and very much kind of the beginning of the next era of Real Madrid with some of these staples that have been there for a decade plus leaving. And then, of course, Barcelona, Rafinha, Robert Lewandowski, Frank Kessié, Andreas Christensen. It seems like Jules Koundé is also imminent. All kinds of new faces coming in. You got 3 guys going to the Premier League. Felipe Coutinho, they basically just asked Aston Villa to give them some money for him so they don't have to pay his wages. So that move got made permanent. Clement Lenglet going to Spurs on loan. And Adama Traore's loan is up. Wanted to at least mention that just because I'm so fascinated with him as a player. So they're all headed back to England, or in Coutinho's case, staying in England. And also, Dani Alves has departed. Not particularly shocking, but again, Barcelona legend, wanted to mention it. Outside of Barcelona, and really your only 2 notable teams that, from a transaction standpoint, big-time moves, Sevilla and Atleti. Sevilla lose Diego Carlos, one of the better defenders in the league. They replace him with Marcao from Galatasaray, so kind of a like-for-like situation there at center back. We'll see what kind of impact that has. Carlos has just been rock solid for Sevilla. And then Atletico, interesting situation. They haven't done much in terms of big moves, but there's still been a lot of turnover. They did sign Axel Witsel from Borussia Dortmund. We'll see what kind of role he plays. Saul and Alvaro Morata are back from loans. And Semi Versalco, Hector Herrera, Luis Suarez have departed. So again, there are big names moving in and out as kind of the previous versions of these clubs slowly fade into the distance, and those players who we associate with, Versalco, Saul, in the case of Atletico Madrid, we associate with these clubs are slowly moving away as sort of the next iteration of La Liga moves forward. So that is your summer recap. Storyline number one, there's nothing close. It's a no-brainer. It's just simply Barcelona. Can they register all of those players I just listed? With said players, assuming they are eligible to play, is this team actually a threat to Real Madrid? And I haven't really talked about that all that much on here. But what they are doing is, in the simplest terms, mortgaging their future, investing their future on this group of players and hoping that if they can just stabilize themselves financially now for the short term, put a Band-Aid on it, this group is going to be good enough to win La Liga, to contend for the Champions League, and to bring in the kind of money needed to actually fix the problem. What happens if this team is not significantly better? You are in the exact same spot financially, and you have less money coming in because they're generating these funds by doing things like selling part of their future La Liga TV revenue. So you have less money coming in if you can't generate more with this group of players. So there's that on top of just, are we going to have a really interesting title race in La Liga between these two teams? And then also, what does Robert Lewandowski look like outside the Bundesliga at this point in his career? I have all the confidence in the world it's going to be a smooth transition, but it's possible things don't go perfectly. Different system, young players. His exit at Bayern Munich was not particularly smooth. There was definitely tension. Does that carry over to Barcelona if things aren't going well and he's not getting what he wants? And then on a broader scale, just are they going to continue to evolve and improve and build? I'm a big believer in what Xavi is doing. They were much better last season. You saw hope. Can they take that next step? Become a factor in the Champions League, even if they're not going to win it. Do more than be a good team in the Europa League kind of thing. And are they serious contenders? Because there's a difference between finishing second and contending, right? They were nowhere close to Real Madrid last year. But that group of players they brought in should close that gap significantly. So there are so many different angles to this, but the storyline for me is very simply, what does this Barcelona team look like, and what does that mean moving forward for their future, for the future of La Liga, and for this season? Number two, like I said, I'm going to go back to this a lot because I think it's a fascinating discussion, but taking a little bit of a different angle here. Can anybody crack this top four and break in? because we've had the same 4 teams the last 3 seasons. It's been very clear who the best 4 teams. Now, it's been different orders. But Real Madrid, Barcelona, Atleti, Sevilla. Clear-cut top 4 teams in the league. It's been those 4 teams the past 3 seasons, like I said. So you start looking at, okay, who are your contenders? If I tell you one of those teams isn't going to make the top 4, who does? Real Betis finished 5th last season, ready to go again, bringing back pretty much the same squad. 6th place Real Sociedad, again, no major departures, brought in a couple of reinforcements in attack. We saw what Villarreal can do. They finished 7th. And now don't have to deal from a, health and safety and fitness standpoint, a deep Champions League run. Now they're still playing in Europe, but you would hope you could do some more rotation to get through, the group stage of the Europa Conference League. Are they better in La Liga this season? Can they go toe-to-toe with a Sevilla? And then the last team I'll throw out there, not that I actually expect them to be in this conversation, but with everything going on, Valencia is going to be interesting, if nothing else, with Gennaro Gattuso involved. This is just asking for headlines and drama. They are a team to keep an eye on no matter how this all goes, just because something interesting is going to be happening. I'm fairly confident in that. So it's not out of the question they make a run at this thing. The gap is fairly small between all of these teams. And you're not looking at any of them wondering. I mean, Valencia to a certain extent, because they have some work to do to get into this conversation. But the other 3, Real Betis, Real Sociedad, Villarreal, they are very much in a position to kind of build on last season. How much higher can they go? Can they be more consistent in the league? And is their ceiling high enough that they can eclipse a Sevilla or an Atletico Madrid, or if something goes terribly wrong, a Barcelona or something like that? So that is what I'm looking for there. And then number 3, just kind of, what does this league do for an encore? Because I would argue none of these teams were real factors at the beginning of last season. I certainly, from a Champions League contender, best team in the world perspective, we're not taking any of them seriously. Real Madrid proved they still belong at that level and need to be taken seriously. Villarreal made the semifinals of the Champions League, and there were 6 teams better than them in La Liga. Now, again, I am a firm believer in there's a price you pay domestically for going deep into a European tournament, or being a team with a squad not built to play those extra European games. Burnley had that happen to them when they tried. But right, we're having a very different conversation. All the talent Barcelona brought in, what Villarreal did, knocking out Bayern and Juventus, what Real Madrid proved, because that team more or less is coming back. And you can always count on your Sevillas and your Atletis to perform well in Europe. They never really disappoint you. And Atleti in particular, they nearly knocked out Manchester City. Now, they also, didn't have a shot for a very long time in that 2-leg fixture. They didn't create anything. But they had their chance and they kept it within a goal. So if things go right, you're talking about Real Madrid contending again. Maybe Barcelona becomes a factor and at least makes the quarterfinals or something. You're never going to bet against Atletico in knockout tournaments as long as Diego Simeone's there. You like Villarreal's chances to win the Conference League, or at least make a deep run. So all of a sudden, we're having a very different conversation about this league as a whole, based on last season. So can you back it up? Can Real Madrid prove that was not a flash in the pan? Can they dominate this league again the way they should? And if everything clicks for Barcelona and they actually get all these players in, okay, maybe they shouldn't dominate it. But there's just that gap is too large for me to think Barcelona can actually win this thing. Unless it all goes swimmingly and Lewandowski is the best player in the league, which is not out of the question. But I need to see something from Barcelona before I believe they can do that. So does Real Madrid prove they're a top 3 team in the world? Does Real show up and perform well, or was that just a weird one-off thing and they finish, 7th again, do fine in the Conference League, and we're not really talking about it? Does somebody make a run at Sevilla for 4th? Does Sevilla pull off a knockoff, an upset somewhere in Europe? So much went right last season, and there's reason to believe it gets even better this year. But the recent past before this season suggested this league was not in a great spot. They did it last season, if you do it again, to me there is no argument to still say it's a down time in La Liga. If La Liga does this again and performs well, they are officially back right up there with any league not named the Premier League. Which, maybe they still were number 2. But that's only because they've always been number 2. And so you maybe give it to them sort of benefit of the doubt. But there's no denying. Those were bad years for the La Liga. This is a league that is supposed to be producing top 3 teams in the world. At least one every single season. And it just wasn't there. So now you have the depth behind your big traditional powers. Barcelona is on the rise. Real Madrid is great. Atleti's a little bit down, but you're never going to count them out. Last year was brilliant. Can you do it again and validate all of that and prove it wasn't a flash in the pan? All right, we're going to take our second break here. When we come back, we can look ahead, preview of the Euro 2022 final. We do have European games this weekend. We're going to touch on those briefly, as well as, of course, Major League Soccer and the NWSL. So all of your weekend action coming up in just a moment. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back one final time to the Touchline Talk Show. Thanks so much for joining us this week. We're going to jump right in to our weekend look ahead. First, we'll get the domestic games out of the way before we talk about the European final. Really, really good weekend in Major League Soccer, starting with Seattle Sounders at LAFC on Friday night. I talked about this in the weekend roundup on Monday. This is the beginning of a brutal stretch for the Sounders. A Sounders team that still has work to do to make the playoffs. If this stretch goes badly, that's probably it. They just don't have a lot of time left once they get through this. Can you at least get a point in this game and come away feeling decent about your performance and sort of build some confidence heading into the rest of this really difficult stretch? Your other games of note on Saturday, Portland at Minnesota, the Timbers team that's rolling. Columbus at Charlotte, battling for those final spots in the Eastern Conference. NYCFC at Montreal, two of your top teams in the East. NYCFC trying to overtake the Union. They both just keep winning at this point, but NYCFC, to me, best team in the East right now. That's not exactly a hot take. Can they keep that going? Toronto at New England. What do the Italians do for an encore after the incredible performance to kick off their Toronto FC careers? Can they keep this going? Can the Revs get something going and start making a push toward the playoffs? And then LA Galaxy at FC Dallas. This is more about the Galaxy, and again, right on that playoff cut line. Some interesting teams right behind them. Some really talented teams right behind them there. How do they handle this? Can they get a really good road win in Dallas? NWSL. Two big-time games here. You got, as we're sort of coming out of this international break, you've got all your international players back. Top team in the league, San Diego Wave, at third place, Chicago Red Stars. And then OL Reign, with all of that talent now sort of coming together, at Angel City. Again, both those games on Saturday. Really, really good ones there. And now, European Championship Euro 2022 final. Talked about a little bit of this before, but I want to go a little bit deeper into it. I got two big questions and two things I'm looking for in this game. One, does Germany do anything other than sit in? Yes, they're defensively sound. They've been great defensively. France also proved there are vulnerabilities there. You can get at them. And as I said before, to me, you are asking for trouble if you are trying to bunker down against this England team. You're also asking for trouble if you try and play an open game with them the way Sweden kind of did. Especially if you don't take your chances. Now, Germany have been critical, so maybe you like their chances a little better. But their offense is not exactly high octane. And they're not creating a bazillion chances most of the time. Especially against the better teams. So how does Germany handle this? Can they control the game from midfield with their really good midfield trio? Yeah, and you saw a lot of, against France, Sarah Dobert sort of sitting in, which I like that idea. Danielle Slade was talking at halftime about how much she liked the shape of that midfield. Do you see some pressing? Can they get 60-65% of possession and really frustrate England? How do they try and do this? And can they actually execute whatever they are trying to do? Because I don't think you can just play defense, and I don't think you can just play offense. You've got to find a way to dictate the terms of the game. And that is something Germany has been good at in this tournament. Because they're so well balanced from front to back. Because they're built on a defensive structure. And then you have an Alex Pop who's scoring goals left and right. Second question. Does Clara Buell play? And no, they didn't really miss her against France. They're deep. They're deep on the wing. It's not a massive, massive loss. But if Pop wasn't scoring every single time she took the field, we would talk about Clara Buell being one of the best players in this tournament. And she still has been. If you're going to try and go toe-to-toe with this England team, you want all hands on deck. I'm hesitant to go so far to say Buell's availability determines Germany's chance to win this game, because I think that it is slightly disrespectful to how good they've been and sort of the inconsistency we've seen from England. But I will feel very differently about Germany's chances if Buell is out of COVID protocol and eligible to play in this game. And if she is, what kind of role does she play? Does she come off the bench? Does she start? Is she effective? It's a very interesting part of this equation as we look toward the game. And the final thing I'll say is, France they got through. Germany got through on Alex Pop magic. I don't see how that is going to be enough on its own in this game. Now, paired with a terrific defensive performance where they dictate the terms of the game and keep England from bombing forward with the fullbacks in the front six, that could be enough. This does not have to be an evenly balanced game in terms of opportunities and chances. But it does have to be a balanced or lopsided in favor of Germany game in terms of how it is played and who is controlling proceedings for Germany to win this. Like, like I said before, I just don't see a world in which this England team gets basically unlucky. Where kind of what, my fear with the U.S. They have all these chances. They can dominate the game. They just can't put them away, and all of a sudden something weird happens on the counter or a set piece, and you lose 1-0 in a game where you're out shooting somebody, 17-4 or something like that. They are too ruthless, too clinical, and they have too many different options, both in the starting 11 and off the bench, as we discussed before. What can happen is Germany does something similar to Spain, or Germany finds a way to improve on what Sweden did and stops England from getting into that sort of 4th, 5th gear offensively in attack. That I could see happening. I just don't expect it all to be coming on the weekend recap Monday going, yeah, England played really, really well. It just wasn't their day. Couldn't take those chances. Had the better of the play overall, and Germany just stole this one. I don't see that happening. Could I see, with the exception being Alex Pop works some magic, and it's England is holding on to a 1-0 lead or a 2-1 lead or something. Germany steals a goal late, gets it to a shootout and wins. That I could see. I'm talking about in the 90 minutes. I don't see England losing in regulation in a game where they thoroughly outplay Germany. Maybe I'm wrong. But to me, they are too good for one player to save you the way Alex Pop did in the semifinal. Before we get out of here, I mentioned this before, I want to highlight it again. We do have European games this weekend. No, it's not the major leagues, but it does involve Bundesliga teams. German Cup is getting underway, sort of first look at all these teams. Whatever lineups are going to be fielded, right? This is a lot of Bundesliga against Bundesliga 2, Bundesliga 3 teams. There are not any particularly spicy matchups where you've got two good Bundesliga teams going against each other. And then also the championship starts this weekend, which is always one of the most fascinating leagues in the world. Wanted to give them a shout out as well. So there you go. There is European soccer to watch. It's terrific. Enjoy that. Enjoy the U.S. Open Cup tonight. Enjoy Euro 22. So much going on as we begin to sort of shift our focus from the summer to next season as these leagues begin to get underway. Thank you so much for tuning in. That's all we've got for you tonight. Be sure to hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Go check out everything on Substack as well, touchlinetalk.substack.com. And we will see you next time.